Hey guys, I guess I only have 10 minutes to do this video, but this one is on the Federal Reserve and central banks, and I'm going to jump right into it. King George III, the war was costing him too much money, so he's going to tax heavily the colonists over here in the United States. Okay, this is where this article starts in the history of central banks and the Federal Reserve. And so he was pouting, and he needed some more revenue, so he decided to tax us over here. In 1763, Benjamin Franklin was asked by the Bank of England why the colonies were so prosperous, and this was his response, quote, "This is simple. In the colonies, we issue our own money. It is called colonial script. We issue it in proper proportion to the demands of trade and industry to make the products pass easily from the producers to the consumers." This all makes sense. In this manner, creating for ourselves our own paper money, we control its purchasing power, and we have no interest to pay to anyone. The Currency Act of 1764 ordered the American colonists to stop printing their own money. Colonial script was to be exchanged at a 2-to-1 ratio for notes, in quotes, from the Bank of England, a central bank. Later, in his autobiography, Benjamin Franklin explained the impact that this currency change had on the colonies. In 1 year, the conditions were so reversed that the era of prosperity ended, and a depression set in, to such an extent that the streets of the colonies were filled with the unemployed. Now, friends, why the change? Why did there, went from a very prosperous country, and within a year there was a marked change where there's unemployment people in the streets? Because a central bank over there in England needed to raise revenue for King George. They started taxing these people and got rid of their own money that they printed. And they tied it to their commerce, supply and demand. In fact, Benjamin Franklin stated unequivocally that the Revolutionary War started because of this fact, that they ended their printing of their own money. It gives a quote by Governor Morris, one of the authors of the U.S. Constitution. He says, "The rich will strive to establish their dominion and enslave the rest. They always did, they always will. They will have the same effect here as elsewhere if we do not keep them in their proper sphere." And that's my contention, is that Big Brother's growing out of his shorts, and he's being tyrannical. He needs to be put back in the closet where he belongs. He's far outreached his powers, or Big Brother has. He's grown into a monster, in my opinion, and along with his buddies, the Federal Reserve and central banks. Unfortunately, those warning us about the dangers of central banks did not prevail. After an aborted attempt to establish a central bank in the 1780s, the first Bank of the United States was established in 1791. George Washington signed in the bill creating the first bank in April 25th, 1791, and was given a 20-year charter to do their thing, okay, to control currency. In the first 5 years, the United States borrowed $8.1 million, guys, back then. And prices, consumer prices rose 72%. Talk about inflation, huh? Okay, borrowing money from a central bank causes this. This is what we're going to see. The opponents of central banking were not pleased. In 1798, Thomas Jefferson said the following: "I wish it were possible to obtain a single amendment to the Constitution taking from the federal government their power of borrowing." Amen to that. In 1811, the charter of the first Bank of the United States was not renewed. They had some sense. Now keep it, but they don't. It's a sad history. 1 year later, the War of 1812 erupted. They didn't get their way. The charter was not renewed. And so what do you know? There's a war a year later. Very interesting, guys. This is history we're not taught in school. The British and the Americans were at war once again. Okay? British come over, burned Washington, D.C., until the Treaty of Ghent, officially ending the war, was ratified by the U.S. Senate, and it was also ratified by the British in February 18th, 1815. Okay? And in 1816, coincidentally, another central bank was created. Okay, they said, if you don't want a central bank, we're going to cause war with you. Okay, that's what's behind all these wars, is the money. Follow the trail. Andrew Jackson, who became president in 1828, was determined to end the power of the central bank over the United States. In fact, in 1832, Andrew Jackson's presidential slogan was "Jackson, no bank." And on July 10th, 1832, Jackson said the following about the danger of a central bank. "It is not our own citizens only who are to receive the bounty of our government. More than 8 million." Well, he goes on to talk about that this just basically benefits the central banks. Okay, our prosperity ends up in the bank's hands. And in 1835, President Jackson completely paid off the U.S. national debt. He is the only president to have done this. President Jackson vetoed an attempt to renew the charter for the Second Bank of the United States. Okay, stamp that baby. Get it out of here. We're not playing those games here. I love it. Richard Lawrence attempted to shoot Andrew Jackson, but he survived. It is alleged that Lawrence said that wealthy people in Europe had put him up to it, no doubt. Okay, so Jackson had an attempt on his life because he didn't want the central bank. And instead, okay, he goes on about the Civil War. And let's see, they wanted to charge Lincoln. The Rothschilds wanted to charge him outrageous interest for borrowing money to fund the war. Lincoln said, "No, thank you. I'm going to print $500 million of debt-free money called greenbacks." You remember that little bit of history. The central banks in Europe were not pleased, and the following quote appeared in the London Times in 1865. Get this, guys. "If this mischievous financial policy, which has its origin in North America," the one Lincoln implemented, "shall become indurated down to a fixture," that means if it stays as policy, "then that government will furnish its own money without cost. It will pay off debts and be without debt. It will have all the money necessary to carry on its commerce. It will become prosperous without precedent in the history of the world. The brains, the wealth, and all countries will go to North America." Huh? "That country must be destroyed or it will destroy every monarch on the globe." Friends, there it is in a nutshell. That's central banking for you. That's Federal Reserve for you. Okay? They do not want this country to prosper. And it has so far. It has so far. But friends, it's been manipulated. We would not have had these recession, depression, inflation cycles if it wasn't for central banks. And there's no reason for it. It's a contrived reality. It's a made-up reality is what we're living. The wars, there's no reason for those wars. It ties right into central banking. Garfield is another one that said no. He was a staunch opponent to it. He said no thank you. No central banks. Killed him. Okay? And eventually they passed the central banks. And interestingly, 10 days after JFK spoke at Columbia University, he was killed, and he was speaking on these things, guys. And Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act in December 22nd, 1913, between the hours of 1 a.m. and 4:30 a.m., in the middle of the night. Very few people there. They're home with their families at Christmas. Friends, that's the history of central banks in this country. I think I probably went over again. Anyway, take care. Have a good evening. Think. Take care.